And Project 25, a suite of digital radio standards for interoperable emergency responder devices and infrastructure equipment, has come a long way in the last 25 years. But how did it all start, and how has industry and consumers benefited from P25? Here to tell us more are the pioneers of Project 25. First on my left is Chris Luigi. He's Vice President of ICOM America and Chair of the TIA Private Radio Section. Next to him is Don Spates, formerly of NTIA and also a telecom consultant. And next to him is John Oblock. He's Vice President of Standards and Regulatory Affairs with EF Johnson Technologies and Chair of TR8. Of course, that's an engineering committee right here at TIA. And coming to us remotely is John Powell, Senior Consulting Engineer at Lafayette Group and member of the P25 Steering Committee. And gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here. Great to have all of you. I know there's been a lot of work over the last 25 years on Project 25. So I'm going to start with you, John, asking you about how this Project 25 all got started.
Well, really, it was the genesis of P25 was a perfect storm around advancing technology, meeting user requirements. We had just come out of some unfortunate experiences with the analog trunk technology that had begun to emerge in the early 1980s, primarily focused around a lack of interoperability between the then three major systems that were in the field, along with digital being on the horizon. From a state and local government perspective, we were looking at the need, as we later will identify in the Project 25 goals, of being able to migrate gracefully into a new digital arena, at the same time not having all of the proprietary technology issues that we had. State governments and some of the cities were looking at, in the next several years, putting online some very large systems, and so there was a need to address all of this. From APCO's perspective, ahead of the initial October 13th, 1989 kickoff meeting for Project 25, at our annual conference in Sparks, Nevada that previous August, and I was the new kid on the block. I had just been elected to the board. At our first board meeting at the end of that conference, immediate past President Gary David Gray came to the board and made a presentation noting that the FCC had just released a notice of inquiry looking at future migration to digital, and recommending that we put together a task force to not only address that notice of inquiry, but also look at where other members of the user community, particularly states and the federal government, were. The board authorized Gary to move ahead with seeking out a venue to hold a meeting. The task force was organized. I was a member of that, along with several other of our past presidents and other board members. And Gary did a yeoman's job in bringing everything together and kind of outlining the critical points.
Don, if you can take us back to, I believe it was in October of 1989 at the Department of Commerce. Take us back to what it was like in those initial meetings. And that was the very first meeting, was that right?
That was the first meeting. But first of all, I wanted to address the federal side of what John just said. The federal agencies had been using digital technologies for a couple of years. And we saw that technology was diverging instead of coming together. So we decided in our own LMR subcommittee to develop a path for federal agencies to march down and come together in one direction, one technology, so that we could all interoperate together. We'd been meeting with APCO and others for several months, and when we found out that APCO was always also thinking about this. And so we decided to host that first meeting in 1989 so that we could develop a collaboration initially between state and local public safety agencies and organizations. But we also found out at that first meeting that the manufacturers were also very interested in collaborating. So that first meeting happened in October. I expected maybe 20 or 30 people to show up. We had almost 100 people show up to that meeting, including APCO and NASTD and a number of manufacturers and a lot of federal agencies. And for about a half a day, we talked about the problems that we both had, or that we all had, and somehow how we could collaborate with each other to develop a path forward.
Let me add, if I can, to Don's comment that in addition to all the people he mentioned, we also had very good regulatory participation at that meeting from the FCC, and there were a good number of users from the DC metro area that also attended.
And that's correct, John. And also, I represented the federal side of the regulatory picture, so I was not a user, but we had plenty of federal departments and agencies represented at that meeting too.
So you know what I think is really important about this comment that they both just made is from the inception of Project 25. This is a program that has been driven by users and their needs and defining their needs, but at the same time it's been a collaboration of government and users and industry right from the beginning and remains that way today.
Absolutely. We did not expect that collaboration to grow, but we did find out that we worked hard. All of us, manufacturers, federal, state, and local agencies worked hard together to make it happen, and it's grown into what it is today.
John Powell, there were a number of goals to be achieved during Project 25 over the last 25 years. You've met many of those goals, if not all of them, but there were some original objectives from the inception of the Project 25 idea, if I can call it that. And I know we have a slide that we can put up that can bullet point some of those objectives. If you can just sort of walk us through those, that'd be great.
Sure, and let me point out that these 5 goals were set at that first October 13th, 1989 meeting, and to this day they remain goals of the project. The first, and I mentioned already that we were looking at some very large systems being built on a digital platform with the great success that agencies had with fielding analog systems. So the first goal of competition in system lifecycle procurement was extremely important as these large systems began to come online, making sure that those users had the benefit of multiple sources for their equipment. Considering that even today the majority of our users are still in the analog world, the second goal of graceful migration forward and backward was very important. Those first fielded radios, and to this day all of the Phase 1 Project 25 handsets and mobile radios in the field still automatically receive analog transmissions that come in on their channel if they meet all of the technical requirements. At the same time, looking forward so that as we migrated to not only to Phase 2, but some of the more esoteric pieces of the standard that are being fielded today, they're being put in a way that even moving forward, equipment that is out there is not impacted and can be over a period of time, entire systems migrated into those new features and functionality. Critical to all of this, as Don already mentioned, it was interoperability. The lack of interoperability between those earlier analog trunk systems was really to the detriment of the user community, so we needed to ensure that interoperability was very important. The fourth goal, spectrum efficiency, was not only being driven by the regulators, in this case the FCC for state and local government, NTIA for federal agencies, but also by the fact that even in those late 1980s, the large metropolitan areas of the country were already becoming severely impacted by a lack of spectrum to get the needed number of talk paths that they needed to dispatch and to manage incidents in their jurisdictions. Finally, it was really important to us that whatever equipment was fielded fielded would be very easy for the users to use. So the fifth goal of user-friendly equipment was added in there, and I think to this day that has proven to be effective. If you talk to the end user, whether they are a first responder, which would be EMS, fire rescue, or law enforcement, or a lot of the other users, whether it's public works or buses, schools, whoever that might be, their main requirement is that their equipment be easy to use. They don't have minutes or hours to dig into the equipment to figure out what those options are. So that last bullet has remained really important. Have these goals been achieved? I think as we go through today's discussion, you'll see that we've been very successful in reaching all 5 of those, and they continue this day to be at the top of our list of requirements as we move forward.
Can I just comment on one of
Please.
the points that John made on his point number 3 about interoperability? I think it's important to note both the level of engineering challenge and engineering accomplishment for all of us to work together to get radios developed that can talk in multi-modes, whether it be P25 conventional, and that same radio could talk to a P25 trunk radio, that same radio could talk to an analog radio, and it doesn't require going through an expensive infrastructure. It can be done point to point. So I think together we've really accomplished a real engineering accomplishment here.
And I wanted to point out that this is the only standard that I know of, public safety grade standard in the world that does that. Comparing it with Tetra and others, they do not do all of those things or extremely well like P25 does.
And Don, this is also the perfect point to add that it is the only standard in the world that is driven by the user community.
Absolutely.
None of the others are.
Absolutely, from the very beginning.
John Oblock, I know that you are the chair of TIA's TR8 Engineering Committee. And I want to ask you actually very quickly to give our viewers some context of what that committee does and what it's intended for. But more importantly, TIA's involvement in Project 25. I know it goes back a number of years, if not all the way to the beginning. So if you can start with a quick description of TR8 and then our involvement in P25.
Okay, well, TIA has been involved in the standards for two-way radio ever since the very beginning of two-way radio. The work of TR8 actually started somewhere around 1940, and so we have a very long history of developing standards for two-way radio, and particularly those that would be involved in public safety. Obviously, when Project 25 was in its early infancy, the committee was looking for a standards organization that could draft the standards, and of course, with TIA having the experience that we've had and being an ANSI accredited standards body, it was just natural that Project 25 would come to TIA and ask us to do the formulating of the standards.
Don, I know that an important part of P25 moving at a healthy pace was really robust collaboration between industry and the users. And it's a bit unusual to have that kind of close relationship on a big project like this. First of all, am I incorrect in saying that? But number two, what were the challenges involved in that process?
It had never been done before, number one. So that in itself became a challenge to figure out how to make government and TIA work together and the manufacturers work together. Generally, it's here's a requirement, manufacturers come back, here's the response. And we wanted more of a collaboration, face-to-face collaboration like we've had in the past. I think the challenges initially were methodology challenges. What manufacturers work at a different pace than government, and some of the issues between manufacturers became a challenge at the beginning, but we worked through those pretty quickly, and I think today it works far better than it ever did at the beginning. I think the first 4 or 5 years it was very difficult, and the committees were a lot smaller in those days too. There were fewer manufacturers, and you had personalities getting involved. So we believe that we worked through those issues relatively quickly, and things work well today.
I think the light really came on for manufacturers when they saw the level of commitment coming forth from the federal government. We were seeing mandates for certain agencies to use P25. We were seeing grant money for P25. We were seeing local agencies building operation plans and response plans around P25. So to manufacturers, clearly this was an emerging technology that appeared to have a high degree of potential for successful adoption by public safety and first responders. So I think that when we saw that support from the federal government, and also smaller manufacturers that didn't have any of this proprietary technology that you were talking about before. This really leveled the playing field for smaller manufacturers, enabled us to have research and development to develop these products to serve these new customers, and gave the customers some choice, which accomplished the other objective of competition. So I think that was a big turning point.
I think on the federal side, the competition was a very, very high priority for us to level that playing field, but we also were concerned with interoperability and spectrum efficiency.
There were also a number
I think one of the initial challenges that we had, and I think it was really one of the great successes for Project 25, was in the 1992 timeframe, hammering out the only one ever to exist, a memorandum of understanding between the TIA representing the manufacturers and the federal, state, and local users. To this day, it's the only one of its kind, and it really has outlined this whole process and made the interaction between all of the players work very, very well.
And I think there were a number of challenges within the TIA process itself to we went through and looked at the process and changed it somewhat to allow the user community to be involved heavily in the standards to the point where we have a process that allows users to participate fully in the early development of standards. And then as they get closer and closer to publication, they're moved over to the TR8 committee and go through the formal TR8 TIA process to actually ballot and publish the documents of standards.
And it's also really important from the steering committee perspective that every time we look at a technology choice as presented, and often we've had multiple choices and we have to go through and evaluate all of them, is that the steering committee goes through an RFP process, and that RFP process guarantees that the playing field is level once a choice is made. We look at involved IPRs, all of the various aspects of the chosen technology, and in place as part of that MOU is the ability for manufacturers to ensure that they are all on that same level playing field.
Chris, I want to go to you about the reception of P25 standards to the emergency responder community. I know there's a number of illustrations that we can put up on our screen. If I can go to my producer to do that, and then have Chris kind of walk us through those as well.
So I think the proof is in the pudding, and that is have public safety first responders and various agencies embraced P25 with the adoption rate. I don't want to bore you with a bunch of slides, but here's one that shows from an independent market research company the past growth of P25 global market share and the forecast into the future into 2016. P25 is the dominant public safety technology worldwide, used in over 80 countries. Another thing you can look at on this next slide is the current user radio market share right now. P25 is used by about a third of the total users in the United States, but you'll notice that 49% are still using analog. So there's a lot of agencies out there that are still going to need funding and still going to need support from their local legislatures and city councils and county councils to complete their conversion over to a digital system to enable all the benefits that they would get for that. I think we also have a slide now that shows the adoption rate nationwide. On this map, you can see that there's over 35 states that have VHF and UHF P25 trunk systems to increase their capacity, and you'll see that 10 states have statewide, wide area VHF and UHF P25 trunk systems that they offer to local constituencies, cities and counties within those states, so they can interoperate with state resources when they're addressing an incident in a part of their state. And then, of course, let's don't forget 700 and 800 megahertz, where there's almost a nationwide adoption of 700 and 800. What this all means is that you have an excellent chance of going into any state if you're an agency that's responding to an incident and having a P25 system that you can operate on. But the job's not done yet. We've got more agencies and cities and counties and state agencies to help them convert to the digital technology. But all in all, this has been adopted very, very well at a very high rate by the public safety community in the United States. If you don't mind me speaking for...
No, absolutely, absolutely.
Let me add that I think, as we predicted from day one, the balance, that the scales were going to tip from the procurement perspective and equipment cost primarily for the end user from analog to digital as we move forward. We're certainly seeing that happen as the cost of P25 equipment is reducing. More and more agencies are picking it up. There are some features and functionality of P25, especially in today's environment where secure communications is extremely important, particularly for the law enforcement side, but also for some of the other responders. And P25 is the only game in town if you're talking about the need for highly secure voice and data communications. Analog simply won't do it.
John O'Block, we talked a little bit about some of the objectives for P25 way back in the day, if you will, and some of those goals that were mentioned by John, Powell, and Chris, and Don as well. It's a fair question. Will P25 be around for another 25 years?
Well, we think obviously technology comes and goes, and we're certainly in a time when communication technology is expanding at a great rate, but we believe that the standard that we've set forth here in P25 will be around for a long time to come. We see broadband data applications being talked about a lot, and yet we feel that Project 25 will continue to be the dominant technology for voice communications in this marketplace for a number of years to come.
Don, another 25 years? Yes, no?
I agree. It may be more than 25 years. I don't think LMR in my lifetime will be replaced by broadband, just from the fact that the coverage we have today for LMR is much greater than what we have for broadband, at least wireless broadband.
Chris?
I agree. And the unique capability of P25 technology and the standards and the suite of standards is that they're living. It's a living standard. And things survive that can adapt to changes in their environment. And that change could be a regulatory change, it could be a change in technology, it could be a change in the needs that the users have to use their radio communications equipment. And P25, the process is iterative, it's adaptive, it's living, it continues to change with all these other changes.
And one other thing on that, we're working now, TR8 is working on interfaces between broadband and LMR as we speak. John could probably talk more about that.
Exactly. We're anticipating that there'll be a mix of these technologies in the world, in the country, and we expect that P25 will be the dominant technology for voice communications, but we also see the desirability of having broadband data and the applications it brings. And so we feel it's natural and it's important that they continue to, or that they interoperate with each other and provide seamless operation between the two types of systems.
John Powell?
Yes, I was just going to add, John brings up a really good point as we're looking at the future of these two technologies coming together, that some of the capabilities of broadband are going to, I believe, greatly enhance features and functionality of P25. For example, the ability to do over-the-air programming, over-the-air reconfiguration of handsets in the field will be greatly enhanced by the speed that a broadband capacity in that same device will bring to us. And certainly I know the manufacturers are looking very closely at that, as is the steering committee. There's an old saying in the standards area that a completed standard is a dead standard. And I just, with the regulatory changes, with the continued need from the user community for enhancements to the standard, P25 is going to be going for a very long time. Not discounting what Don said, that in some parts of the country, especially where I am in very rural America, it's really the only game in town, because we will never see broadband implemented to the degree that it would need to actually replace P25. So as the mission critical voice provider, P25 will be it. I think it will become more intense, more well embedded every year as we move forward for the next several decades.
Chris, for all intents and purposes, P25 was a success. It will continue to be successful. I know that you brought a report card of sorts with you to go over some of that success in the past. And my producer, once again, if you can put that up, and we'll have Chris walk us through that.
So this is just kind of a recap of our discussion that we just had, but if we could go to the next slide. The next slide is really our report card. And that is, how would you measure Project 25 to determine if it's a success or not? Well, one thing is, have the initial principles and promises been met? The answer is yes. Is there worldwide penetration? Has it occurred? Yes. Are there multiple vendors of products and services providing users real choices? Yes. Do they compete for your business? Let me tell you, they do, from personal experience. Interoperability, does it exist in meaningful tiers? Yes. Are there scalable solutions to fit different users that have different needs, whether that be a rural a fire department or a large city police department? The answer is yes. What is the adoption rate? Are agencies embracing this technology and deploying these systems? Overwhelmingly yes. Future trends, will deployments increase? Yes. And a range of support services to support this technology, are they readily available? Yes. So when you sit back and look at P25 and ask, will it continue to evolve and meet public safety needs, let's say, for another 25 years? I think, to me, the answer is yes. And by any measure, this program has been an overwhelming success.
To Don, Chris, John O'Block, and John Powell, you've done incredible work over the last 25 years. I'm sure you or your teams or your colleagues will continue to do that. It's nice to be able to capture all of that work in half an hour in our studio, and we hope to continue to do that, by the way. Hope you revisit us maybe next year. We can talk about it again. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you again to all of our panelists today. For more information about P25, you can go to project25.org, and for copies of the compliance assessment documents that users can reference for all P25 standards, go to llis.gov. So long.